What is going on? Red Master here, and welcome back to another episode of Cards and Castles Tier List, where today we are nearly completed with these factions. Today hitting up the ninjas, so just ninjas, druids, and the neutral faction left to go. So you guys know how the system works by now. A full tier list is down in the description below. And with that being said, let's just jump right into it. So the first card I want to talk about is the Mystic Dojo. Now, on the list, I did mark the Mystic Dojo off as a B tier card, and that might surprise some people, especially knowing that trap decks are going around right now. There are a few of them. I mean, not as prevalent as January and February, but they are still out there and they are still doing fairly well for themselves. But the reason why I marked it off as a B tier card is because of I'm looking at diversity when I'm ranking these cards. So with Mystic Dojo, it's kind of like me throwing it into a monster deck. Is it good? Probably not. But in a trap deck, it does work very well. It's kind of like a middle ground where it gets its marking at. It's good for what it's doing in its deck. But it can't really work outside of that. And again, normally I would make those C tiers. But I think Dojo is doing more than some of their archetype-specific cards, because Mystic Dojo has been a very solid draw engine for the trap decks. Since they've come out, everyone runs the Mystic Dojo, and especially double dojos, for that insane draw power. So for what it does in the deck, I definitely say that would compensate for its lack of diversity. And that kind of goes the same with Aijitsu. I mean, Aijitsu, I was thinking about marking off as an A tier card in my mind, because you can actually add Aijitsu to different, more decks, so thereby increasing its diversity factor. Let me just go over to Aijitsu. But I was kind of thinking the same lines. Like, it's a hefty investment for Aijitsu. 3 gold is a critical, in my opinion, one of the critical points of a matchup. So, personally, I think it's sort of, you're risking a turn or risking a big point in the match by playing Aijitsu. So, no disrespect to these cards, though. For what they do in their decks, they are certainly some of the best cards to go to. But diversity-wise, as I keep saying, they don't really fit in a lot of different decks. I mean, again, you can argue more for Aijitsu. For Dojo, definitely, I would say it needs to stick to a trap deck for it to, work its magic. So that being said, I think that will be a good point for the traps of this video. I know ninjas are kind of big for their traps right now, but I think that's a good point to leave off on them for now and make a transition into our next card. And that next card we'll be going into is Vanishing Strike. Now, in my opinion, Vanishing Strike is one of those very underutilized ninja spells, because it certainly does a lot for, its simple 1 gold cost. Of course, it is unique, so, you can't really stack, but you give a unit +3/+3, and if it survives, in combat, it returns to your hand. Now, that is pretty good, especially if you're using this on a slightly damaged unit. With bounce decks, though, not being too popular nowadays, I can see why people sort of tend to stay away from Vanishing Strike, but I do think Vanishing Strike is still a very solid spell to include, even to experiment around with if you're not completely solid on it. I still think it's one of those, like, I can try it out in the deck, maybe it won't hurt me kind of cards. The 3/3 boost, I would say, is probably the biggest draw for this card, in my opinion. When you look at that 3/3 boost, I kind of go back in my head to Might of the Minotaur and seeing how that's trapped. Same stats, but it costs, 3 to put on. So that certainly should give some context as to how cheap, Vanishing Strike really is. You're getting that those stats at the cost of a 3 gold trap just for 1 gold. And sure, it might return to your hand, but that is going to be probably a beneficial part as well, seeing as how you might be using this card, more on a damaged unit, or one that might die soon, who you may want to keep a little longer, or know it's going to hurt your opponent if you bounce it back to put it, and then to throw it back out at full strength. And again, diversity, this card is, a really, really strong, card in kind of any deck you would throw it into. So, I definitely think it deserves an A tier ranking. Again, an underutilized ninja spell. But again, not much else to really put out there for this card. So, with that being said, let's move into our next one. And the next card is the Shadow Katana. Now, the reason I marked Shadow Katana also as an A tier card is sort of for similar reasons why I marked off Vanishing Strike. Of course, this card does much less than Vanishing Strike and kind of is more expensive, but I still think whether or not you use Shadow Katana is, or when a Shadow Katana, is played on a unit, it definitely speaks volumes in a matchup. When you see a Shadow Katana played on a unit, it's usually a unit that, it's not really a weak unit, but it's definitely one of those mid-tier units that if they get buffed, it's going to be trouble. I'm thinking in my head right now some good examples. Obviously, units with First Strike, Ronin Demon Hunter, White Knight, or Vampire with Lifesteal. Cards that kind of work with that ability will usually get Shadow Katana buffs, but even then, any sort of card with a Shadow Katana buff, despite how, the +2 isn't really going to help, the +3, though, it will certainly help. Just balancing, the stats are kind of what I like about this card and why it's an A tier. 3-2, definitely more of an odd stat line, but like I keep telling people in this expansion, stats are very important. They matter. So, if you give a unit this big of a boost, especially maybe in your earlier games, turn 3, turn 4, can definitely throw your opponent off for a loop and maybe even force them to devote unnecessary resources, thereby increasing your chances of winning. So that's just my take on the Shadow Katana. I think it's one of those, not really too underutilized spells like Vanishing Strike. People do use Shadow Katana, especially if they are running decks that like those kind of buffs for them. So I think it does well with that. And again, you can throw this into nearly any deck, just because it's a very simple card, and sometimes simple is more. So that's my take on the Shadow Katana. That's why I marked it off as an A tier. And with that, let's move on into our next card. And the next card is going to be Multi-Strike. Now, Multi-Strike I do find a bit of an intriguing card. It's one that will often pop up every now and then, but we don't really see a lot of it. Now, if you notice the tier list, you'll notice that I kind of marked a lot of the just more expensive spells in, C or F tier rankings because I don't really find them all that useful, especially since a lot of them are either archetype strict or archetype specific, or overall just terrible. But however, I find Multi-Strike to be the exception. Why is that? It's because of its ability, giving a melee unit evasive and an extra attack this turn. So, essentially, you're giving another unit another attack, which is a pretty solid move. And what's the nice bonus is that this card isn't restricted for castles, meaning that you can use this card and have a unit attack a castle twice. And usually that's what this card will do if it's being played. Maybe not all the time, but in majority of times when I see Multi-Strike being used, it usually ends up on a double castle strike, and that's usually with a big unit doing about 6 or 7 damage just on its first strike, or if it's a weaker unit, obviously doing that damage together. But you kind of get my point here. Multi-Strike is a very, very solid ninja card. Now, the reason why it's not an A tier or S tier, in my opinion, is just it's pretty hefty of an investment to do. 4 gold. I marked Drain Life off as an A tier. It kind of falls in the same category. But we saw what Drain Life does, dealing damage and giving a unit extra stats. While this one just allows second attack, so it could be a risk to play this card for sure. And that's why, again, I mark it off as an A tier, B tier, excuse me. If it was an A tier, I would say the cost might be the only sort of thing holding it back from S tier, but B tier because of the ability. It's not doing a hell of a lot like Drain Life. It's permitting just an extra attack for 4 gold. Again, possibly risky to do. But again, definitely stands out from all the other spells. I kind of want to address that separately because Multi-Strike is a card, again, not often used, but perhaps we can see more of in the coming months. You never know what can rank the ladder. Never really can guess it. But that being said, I think that's a good cover on the multi-strike, and we can move into our final card for the ninjas. And that card is Shoden, hopefully pronounced that right, the Zen Master. Now, this card kind of falls in the same place as multi-strike. Because if you notice, a lot of the cards when you go into the later side of ninjas the ones that are more expensive anyway tend to be lower ranked, because ninjas overall do not really like to be going into that late game territory. It's kind of, it's not their style anyway. So, but why is Shoden so much different than the other ones? You see Wotan marked off as C, you see King Kaiju marked as C, Stone Drake is C, Trapdoor Ninja is C. The only other is Panda, and I've already talked about Panda separately, I think, at one point, but the reason why I want to talk about Shoden, this one, is because I feel like he's a bit, he's more special than the other sort of ninja late game units. Shoden can be played and still be a valid threat to opponents. And not saying that the others are not, I just think Shoden's definitely more important thanks to that secret attribute awaken ability. With Shoden, for those of you quickly who do not know all of Shoden's abilities, I'm going to run them down. If you pair him with Vikings, you will get Lightning. Crusaders get sort of a health and temporary shield thing. I know it involves health. Warlock, 2 explosive damage. Pirate, -1 attack, I think, and 1 range. And Druids get Rampage. If you pair him off with a mono faction, he doesn't really get any sort of extra ability for that. But overall, a variety of abilities to pair with the Shoden. Again, one of the reasons he's actually more devastating in the rainbow drafts, because you can get all of those abilities and become this crazy, crazy monster card. But Shoden definitely has more potential than the other sort of ninja late game units to really make a point. So in my long-winded way, I'm essentially saying it's sort of like Jomviev and Rusty Hooks. It's an underrated legendary that can be, so much more if you want to include him or at least try him in a deck. Excuse me. Despite that he is, of course, awakened, that shouldn't really stop you from giving him a try. Obviously, cards like Ronin, Mischievous Imp, and all those guys are actually still used in other sort of non-awakened decks, so don't let the awaken kind of stop you from at least testing out maybe a Shoden or 2 in your deck. You'll find that he's just definitely an awesome, awesome threat to your opponent. That's what I was trying to find out. And who knows, maybe one day Shoden can get a buff. Hopefully maybe in the next update. You never really know. I would like to maybe see a Shoden buff, because he's definitely sort of underrated where he is currently right now. So, overall, I think that's a good point for the Ninja Tiers list. We've done a, good hefty amount of cards. So yeah, good work. That being said, guys, I hope you did enjoy this Ninja tier list. Of course, if you guys haven't already done so, give the full tier list a read down in the description below. And while you're down there, be sure to like this video, share with your friends, and comment down below your thoughts on the Ninja faction. And what you guys think, if you agree or disagree with anything on my tier list. Again, tell me that in the comment section below. And again, while you're down there, if you haven't already done so, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. Help show your support to the channel. Help us grow all by clicking that subscribe button at no additional cost to you. So that being said, guys, until next time, stay gaming.